Okay, so let's take a moment here, and then when you complete this, you can take a break, and then we'll meet back up. So this is a form of therapy. It's called grief house therapy. You're welcome to do it today. I'm going to give you a few minutes to do this, and it's something that you may want to also do later. So here's how it works, and it's really, really small print on here, and so I've got it in larger print here, okay? So for the foundation of the house, and so this will be on your paper that's right here. Write 3 to 4 values that govern your life. It's fine if it's one thing, 1 or 2 things, right? But write a few things that are important to you. On the first floor, right here, write 1 or 2 sentences about a loss that you have experienced. It doesn't have to be about all of them. It doesn't have to be about the most painful one, whatever. Just a loss that you are thinking about at the moment or that you've experienced. Write 1 or 2 sentences about that loss. On the second floor, write who or what has helped you in your loss. On the third floor, is there anything positive that has came from your loss? And it's okay if you say no, all right? Is there anything positive that's came from your loss? But this forces you to take a moment. In the attic, right here, write a statement of hope for your future. So is there something to look forward to in your future? On the roof line, people and things that protected you. Then we have along this side of the house, along the side of the house, write the people or things that support you. And so that can be on either one of these sides. So people that protect you, people that supported you. On the door, write the things that you keep hidden or the thing that you keep hidden from others as it relates to the loss. On the chimney, write down ways that you blow off steam. Okay, so this doesn't have to be essay form answers, right? You can write a 1-word thing for any of these to just help remind you, okay? Write ways that you blow off steam. There's a flag or a billboard that we put here. Write something that you wish others knew about your loss. So something about your loss that you just wish everybody could know, something that you could shout about it. And then finally, draw yourself where you see yourself living in this house. So this is your person right here. So where are you at in this house at this moment? All right, so I'll buzz through this page real quick, and because the pages to follow kind of explain all this. So there are obviously different circumstances of grieving. You're never in a place of life to where you were able to say, oh, this happened at the perfect time. You know, it's never like that. So there's always circumstances that are leading up to the grieving to where you're not always a healthy person coming into a loss. There's things that are happening in life that you can't control that come into the loss, all of that. So there's always circumstances that are surrounding grieving. There's never this box that you just can set everything in and say, oh, this is going to be the period of time in my life to where I grieve, and then I go on to something else. Okay, so who you are going into the loss will shape how you experience it. So there's pre-loss factors that we're going to talk about. There's relationship influence, time and proximity to death, and when a loss happens that's different than your assumptions. When something shocks you or something that you assumed would happen a certain way and it goes differently, okay? So here's some pre-loss factors. Some of these are really, really obvious, but others we'll kind of talk through a little bit. So pre-loss factors. And so it really does matter how old you are, and even more so than how old you are, maybe experiences that you've had in life. But age does make a difference on how you're experiencing loss. Age and gender, beliefs and values. Sometimes a loss doesn't fit your belief system. And so that can really rock your world. We'll talk about more of that later. Your culture, religion. There's social variables to where you might be in a different place in life and a loss is shocking. You might physically be moved in a different location and have to return back somewhere because of a loss. So there's concurrent stress that you're just facing anyway on a daily basis, and then now a loss comes. There's the coping styles that you have, And some of that has to do with the attachment theory that we hit on. Like, we didn't even hit like a 0.5% of attachment theory, okay? That's like a complete other class. And so, but those coping styles, some of that has to do with attachment theory and how you cope with life, or how you go through life, how you face it, whether you avoid things, whether you kick the can, whether you're just anxious about everything. Those are all coping styles. The trauma history that you've already faced, sometimes the loss you're facing now is just another thing on the pile. And so the trauma history affects that. The attachment style you have, one of the greatest predictors for complicated grief outcome is an insecure attachment history. And so that's what complicates. So if you're the fearful avoidant, things like that, if you're coming fearful avoidant into a loss, that really complicates your grief. Don't think that you're completely broken, or it's something that can't be repaired, or that you're just a mess of a person. No, that's just a fact of the situation to say, if you are already struggling with attachment and a loss happens, then you're going to continue to struggle even more. And I don't want you to ever think that, oh, now it's impossible, I can't do anything about it. No, just because you're struggling doesn't mean that you quit. You can still continue. So, and that's what this is for, to help us in the struggle. So then it's other pre-loss factors are your ego and strength that you had coming into it, your personality, physical things like exercise habits, sleep habits, nutrition, and physical health. All of these are pre-loss factors that affect post-loss, that affect you when you're in grief. And so then there's the relationship and influence. So the relationship that you had with the deceased, was this a day-to-day? We talked every day. You lived with them. Was this we only talked 2 times a year? What kind of relationship did you have? And this is this is not only with a deceased, but just maybe a relationship loss. What kind of relationship that you had influences the post loss, or the time during grieving. The nature of attachment. Did you have a secure attachment? What was the role of the loss? Role of the loss, or the role of the deceased in your life? Was it someone that helped you through stressful moments, right? Was it, in some cases, what was the role of the deceased or role of the lost? In some cases, it's someone that is part of your stress relief, someone that you would call or go to, and now they're not there anymore. In a lot of cases, and even in our last seminar, we spoke about someone that had like loss of what did they do? Sorry. They took in, like, they did foster care for like pets and things like that, and so they were always taking older animals and things, and so they were continually experiencing the loss of a pet. And so there was the role that those pets, that role that they were in that person's life was therapy, right? And so that can change in loss. All right. So what was the role of the deceased? What was the characteristics? Was there characteristics about them that were really strong for you? Was there any unfinished business? And this is what we, was there any unfinished business? Was there something that we hoped to get done or hoped to accomplish? Or, oh man, we never got to go. I always wanted to go fishing and we never got to do that. Those kind of things. Was there any unfinished business or relational things that unfinished business? Man, we just had an argument and we didn't resolve it. I didn't get to say I love you again. Things like that can be so devastating. Unfinished business. Then there's what was the degree of life satisfaction that you already had in that relationship that you had lost? Other loss factors. How the death occurred. Was this a traumatic event? Was this something that was leading up to a time where you knew it was coming? What was the degree of anticipation? There are pre-grieving moments or pre-grief factors to where you can be grieving a loss before the loss happens. And this is so common in caretaking situations. This is so common in caretaking situations to where those moments that are really difficult, to where they say, okay, they may have 2 more days, 3 more days, when timelines are given, and you know the loss is about to happen, and you already start grieving now, and that's normal. You already start grieving now. You already start to feel the anger. You feel you're denying that this might happen. You already start working through some of these things that we already talked about. The degree of anticipation or the suddenness. Was it a violent or traumatic loss? Was it ambiguous? Was there more than one feeling? The moments of, this is what I talked about earlier, where there's a sense of relief, but also a sense of deep sadness. Is it ambiguous? The timeliness of the loss. Too young, too soon. Or sometimes we say they lived a good long life. This too young and too soon is this loss factor that can change so much for us, because you've made plans for the future and then the losses happen. Or a good long life. Then there's a stigmatized death that's marked with disgrace, meaning maybe someone that you've lost, or you're helping somebody through something they're going through, that they've lost someone, but it was because they did something wrong, or because they got themselves in trouble. A stigmatized death, or drug-related incidences, things like that, overdose. Those are times when the one grieving is treated differently. When you're grieving the loss of someone who has committed suicide, or who had been murdered, or had a drug overdose, those things that are so crazy traumatic, those stigmatized losses, to where it's very difficult to grieve because you're being looked at differently, or the person that you're grieving is looked at differently. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second, okay? I'm not going to just leave you there for the rest of the day. So in these moments, we focus on the pain that is felt by the griever and not the circumstance of the loss. So if you yourself, or you're helping someone who is grieving a stigmatized death, something marked with disgrace, something that people would look down on or look at you differently, the first thing and the best thing that you can begin to do is, if you're helping them, we focus on the pain that's being felt. Or even for yourself, to say, there's pain being felt for this loss, no matter how it happened or what happened or the circumstances surrounding it. I'm still facing a loss. So we focus on the pain that's felt by the griever, and not all of the chaotic circumstances around the loss and how it happened. And sometimes people want to fix it and work it out. And, oh, if they wouldn't have done this, or if you would have been a better parent. And they start going down the list, right? No, there's real loss here. Let's focus on the pain of the loss, not the circumstance of the loss. So we go right into that, to disenfranchised losses. These are moments where you feel that you're deprived of the right to grieve. So this will happen in an ex relationship, to where you feel deprived of the right to grieve, because sometimes, and most of the time in an ex relationship, there were positive things about that relationship. And so you'll have moments of grief to where you feel like you're doing something wrong, to think about the positive moments when you're trying to work through the grief of it, and you feel like you're all alone. It's disenfranchised. You're deprived of that right to grieve. I can't grieve this because I'm supposed to move on from it. For some people, it's a secret relationship, an abortion, something that people don't want to talk about, or they don't want to bring up, or they feel terrible about, or feel like they've, all of the things that surround this. But when a loss has happened, it's happened. But in those moments, people can feel like they are deprived of the right to actually grieve this decision. For some people, it's the loss of a grandchild. If you're not if you're not the parent, but you've lost a grandchild, and you can feel like, oh, I can't grieve as much as the parents, or I have to be strong in these situations, and you feel deprived of your right to grieve when it hurts just as bad. Deprived of the right to grieve in miscarriage situations, to where a lot of people don't understand this situation of how much of an attachment was already there. And those are one of those disenfranchises losses that people like you just to move on with and move on with life. But it's real pain that has to be worked through. Loss that experienced through adoption and foster care. And like I said earlier, I was joking around, when, there's some foster care situations to where there was a sense of relief, but there's always the grief and loss. There's always things that you face, with some of the children we had early on in foster care. There's always these moments looking back and man, I was a terrible foster dad for this child sometimes. I could have done better, or you feel regretful because of situations or places that they had to go back into. And all of that, is loss, but this can be a disenfranchised loss that sometimes people don't always understand, or you feel deprived of your right to grieve it because it's not your child. Deprived of your right to grieve in a situation to where a friend, a loved one, a family member, a spouse is in prison. You feel deprived of your right to grieve because likely something happened to where that sentence, whether we want to admit to or not, sometimes a sentence was deserved, or it's something that they have to follow through with. Not all the time, but we can feel deprived of a right to grieve that moment because it is a real loss that we're experiencing, but it's an ambiguous emotions. There's ambiguous loss to where there's so many thoughts and emotions that are tied to it. That chaos can be hard to find clarity in. So it's finding a moment to simplify it, to say, man, I'm feeling deprived of my right to grieve here, but I do have a right to grieve this. Feeling deprived of your right to grieve when you're a caregiver with someone who's slowly fading with dementia or cancer. When you're caregiving through all of that, you can feel deprived of your right to grieve, especially if you're the caregiver that's not a direct relative, right? And some of you, and we know some that work in these situations to where you're caregiving and you're taking care of somebody, but you're not a direct relative, or you're just a friend, or maybe it's even part of your job, and you can feel deprived of your right to grieve in this situation. So then there's cyber loss. There's people that you've never actually met, or a relationship that can be lost there. Life expectations. Man, I thought it would go this way, but it never happened, and it's a loss in life. It's like all of my dreams to be in the NBA are shattered, right? That's a life expectation loss, right? Vicarious grieving. So this is grieving, likely in these moments you've had other loss, and so when something, a loss of a celebrity or a national event, something, a 9/11 kind of event takes place, all of that grief comes back up, right? And so this is a vicarious, you feel bad for someone else that's facing the loss, but it's disenfranchised, or you feel deprived of the right to grieve because what are people going to think because I'm crying because this celebrity passed away, or I'm dealing with this in a hard way. I'm still thinking about families that were lost in this tragedy. Those can be disenfranchised losses. Then there's the no big deal loss. And like I talked about, sometimes that happens with a miscarriage, or that happens when some people call it a no big deal loss. If someone lived a good long life, right? And so, well, it's no big deal. They lived a good long life, they'll say things like they're in a better place now, things like that. But you say, no, but I'm still hurting, I'm still hurting. And this no big deal loss, like the loss of a pet, or the loss of something to where somebody else wouldn't really understand the relationship that you have. Those are all disenfranchised losses to where you feel deprived of your right to grieve. But in all of these losses, you do have a right to grieve, and it is normal that you're grieving these losses.